welcome to this next edition of the Value Exchange podcast. I'm Annabelle Lambert. I am here with my usual co-host, Rob Pye. Say hello, Rob Pye.
Good morning, lovely people.
Thank you for that. Today we are excited to be joined by an old friend of mine called Julie Mountain. Julie started her her education in architecture, but now finds herself designing much more than just buildings, and has, I feel, devoted a lot of your career to designing space for play. And what that means for young and old people. So without further ado, I will ask you, Jules, to please tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're about, and where it all started.
Thank you very much. Well, as you say, we've known each other an awfully long time, since, oh my word,
1989.
Yeah, 1989. Okay. So when I met Annabelle, I was studying architecture in London. I had a vocation. That's what I wanted to do. I'd wanted to do that for a very long time. And since then, I've done an awful lot of other things. I'm not an architect. I have picked up all sorts of project management jobs over the years. I've now got a family. I've moved around the country. I've been fortunate to work abroad a few times, and I'm currently working for the NHS, for a charity within the NHS, and it's not architecture, and it's not landscape design, and it's not play, but it's really good. I'm really loving it. But there's
so interrupt that to keep everybody really guessing and where you are now. Develop a story, because I love interrupting. And so why architecture? So let's just go back. I mean, we're not sure we need to go back to birth, but if you can, if you want to. Where was that? Yeah, where was the? You said something. Why architecture? Where did that come from?
I suppose intrinsically, one of the themes that I suppose runs through my core interest is design. I'm always interested in design. I'm very much about making things. I was that classic child with 15 tons of Lego. I was constantly building.
I was just going to do that. I was going to get building the Lego.
Yeah. In fact, I'm sitting in my office now, but over in the corner, I might bring this over and show you in a bit. I have a Lego model that I made about 2 weeks ago of one of the things that I'm currently doing in my current professional life. So I've never actually lost that desire to make things. And
so you built your life around continuing your Lego addiction is another
way.
It
is. And actually, I mean, who could criticise that, really? That's so yeah. So I was very driven. I was very interested in design. I was particularly interested in the kind of mechanics of architecture, of how things are put together, how you make them work. Interestingly, when I was reflecting on kind of where I've been and where I am now in readiness for chatting to you guys, I remembered that my careers teacher at school, when we had that talk about what do you want to do, and I said, I really want to be an architect, and he said, I don't think it's for you. And I said, why not? And he said, you'll just find yourself doing plumbing every day. And I remember it so clearly that that's what he told me. And I can honestly say I've never plumbed in my entire life at all. It was a really
it's quite funny that my second interruption, but just a memory just come out there. It's like my father, who was in the military all of his life from national service, and he did that careers advice to me. It's I really don't think the military's for you. And so of course, what did I do?
Oh my word!
Join the army.
Did you really?
Wow. Yes, and I did, and then so I realised years and that really wasn't for me.
Yeah. I mean, as it turns out, he was right. It wasn't for me, but not for the reason that he suspected that it was. So yeah. So I always knew I wanted to do something that was about designing and making something tangible. So that's kind of how I ended up in kind of London, and how I ended up meeting Annabelle, really. Who kind of just being there, really.
So take us on the what is it called? Squiggly career now. So take us from the
So,
architect to the squiggly career.
okay, so I loved architecture school. I was very fortunate to go to the Bartlett, which is a fantastic school, and I really loved it. But in reality, I was a very mediocre architect. And the courses that I did, the subsid courses that I did, the one that I really, really connected with was landscape architecture. And when I came out of, when Annabelle and I both graduated, there was a massive recession on. There was no work in architecture at all, and especially for someone who hadn't got a particularly good degree like I hadn't. So I kind of was enforced into having a year of rethinking what I was actually going to do. I could go back and do the next 2 years of architecture, but I wasn't feeling excited about that at all. So in that year off, got a job, obviously earned a bit of money. I also volunteered in a school, in an infant school. And I started to think, well, do I go into teaching? I'm really enjoying this work with these young children. It's fantastic. Very rewarding, very challenging. But I was still really taken by landscape architecture. And in the end, I decided to go and do landscape design. So I moved up to Newcastle and did the master's course up there. Yes. So that's where I went off and did that. And I suppose, all the time in the back of my brain, I had that kind of passion for education and learning, and the fascination of learning is, how do we learn? Everybody learns in a different way. I know things like VAK are now debunked, but people do absorb information in different ways, and they impart it in different ways. And even while I was doing my landscape course, I was really interested in how do we get that learning to stick with young people. So after I'd finished that, I was very fortunate to fall into a job with a very tiny charity in Newcastle, Newcastle Architecture Workshop, and they were working with regeneration areas. They had quite a lot of regeneration funding, and there were a couple of amazing mentors there, a landscape architect and a teacher. And I literally could not have landed in a better place, because those two people, and I will name check, Mick Hall and Ruth Barker, they were amazing. I just sucked out everything that they knew, and they showed me what they knew, and they demonstrated what an impact it could have on communities when you think beyond imposing a design or a building or a landscape or whatever it might be, or a town plan onto people, but instead you pull out from them what they know about their space and their expertise in their own area. It was, people say things were formative, but for me it truly was. And kind of everything.
Tell us more, because in terms of our design philosophy, even if you're a programmer, I'm not a failed architect, but a failed programmer. I was never any good at it, but I understand it. But actually, a brilliant programmer. Design philosophy of bottom up, of community up, is what we're all about. So how does that work? Because again, when I think architecture or architects, I just think of the Battersea Power Station project, or these great sort of top down things where
I think, Rob, that's exactly why it didn't work for me, because even though I hadn't realized that when I was at architecture school, that is clearly where that kind of misshape, that misfit was happening, is that architecture school teaches you to do that, and actually real people don't want that. They want to shape and influence the space that they spend so much time in, whether it's their home, their neighborhood, their school, their office building. And in the same way that you're talking about infrastructure and ecosystems and businesses have to fit around the people, not the other way around. I think intuitively I knew that, and that's what I was pushing against when I was at architecture school. When I was doing my landscape course, I guess the nature of that is that what you do, you are influenced by what nature does. You know, you can tarmac all you like, but the tiniest little bit of dirt that appears, nature will colonize. And I often use that Jeff Goldblum meme from Jurassic Park, where he goes, "Life will find a way," because it will. And I think for me, that landscape design course showed me that people can shape and innovate. And we all do that with our own gardens. If you think about the immediate environment outside of your house, if you're fortunate enough to have a balcony or a garden or whatever you might have, you shape that and you get enormous pleasure out of the fact that it looks great, but you did it. So coming out of that into the architecture workshop in Newcastle, I was working with, for example, school communities where we were looking at revamping playgrounds that are really kind of entry level, these very harsh, stark city centre playgrounds. We used to call them grey and green deserts. So lots of tarmac, and if you were lucky, you had a bit of field. So we were trying to create spaces that would envelop children and nurture their desire to learn and give them opportunities to socialize and be physically active and, you know, just engage with their neighborhoods. So that's the kind of projects that we were doing, and Mick, as the landscape architect, was teaching me vast amounts about how you make that happen. You know, how your design philosophy can be shaped by what children and young people need and want. And Ruth, as the teacher, was showing me how you get that information out of the children and young people. You know, what is the technique? What tools do you use to listen to their voices? And then you use your skill as a designer to interpret that in a way that will create a space that meets their needs. And
I feel we could talk about this forever, because if you watch, you know, if you watch kids play, and you know that bit of dirt you talked about, you know, it's almost the starting point for serious play for kids, isn't it? You watch children with a puddle. You know, it's like adults. It's like, what, risk averse? Let's, you know,
not me.
Like,
I love a puddle.
Here we go. Who doesn't? Splash into it. And it just this way that, and of course the sort of the role that entropy plays in putting things back to nature, which almost
Absolutely.
is anathema of the architect's mindset, which is almost that control mindset. So,
yeah.
I mean, we really could develop this very, very far. You know, it's like, oh my word, yes. So how did they teach this? What are some of the things that stuck in terms of the way that you would do that?
I guess, I mean, I'm thinking I was kind of in my, well, by then mid-20s. Mm-hmm. And I think at that time in our lives, we've still got that very plastic brain. You know, we're still taking in as much as we can. We want to learn more. You're at the start, you'll remember yourselves, you started your career, you've got kind of a sense of what direction you might go in now. And so to all intents and purposes, I followed Mick and Ruth around everywhere they went. I went to all the meetings with them. I participated in the workshops that they set up. And there's just lots of, in the sort of 70s and 80s, there were some really interesting community development programs and schemes happening in the UK and in the States as well, looking at slum areas, and thinking to Newcastle, to a particular area that you both might be aware of, the Biker Wall. So the Biker Wall is this Ralph Erskine designed, beautiful, well, in the eye of the beholder, I guess, because lots of people think it's not beautiful, but it's a very long building, flats, regeneration project, and it was slum before that. It used to run down the hillside in Biker towards the river, and it was all back-to-backs, very, very poor neighbourhood, very desolate, great fun as a child. To grow up in, and you'll have seen the photographs, I'm sure, of the children leaping out of the derelict buildings onto mattresses and, you know, riding their bikes. Those are all photographs taken in kind of, you know, the East End of Newcastle. So Ralph Erskine's team pulled together community development, and they talked properly to those neighbourhoods, and they listened to what they talked about. So they weren't asking about what do you want, they were asking what do you need, and how do you need it to be? Tell us what a great neighborhood looks like. And you know, I still say this now when I go into schools. If you ask a child what they want in their playground, they want a swimming pool, they want a BMX track, they want 10 trampolines, they want a McDonald's. You might want those, but you can't have them, and they're not appropriate in that landscape. So you do ask about what do you need, and you try and tease that information out by asking people to talk around what comfortable, what well-being looks like. We didn't use those words in the 70s and 80s. That wasn't something that we were familiar with, but it was the same concept, is how are we going to make you feel at home in your home? So that was all happening in Newcastle, and the team at the architecture workshop had been involved in the periphery in that. So lots of those principles about talking to communities, talking to individuals, bringing on board youth groups and churches and all of the organisations that operate in those areas, and dialing down the talk and dialing down the rhetoric and lifting up the listening. And there's lots of written material which is about how you listen to people and how you interpret what they're saying. So that's what we did. You know, we did show examples of, you know, this is what other neighbourhoods have done, but what you're trying to avoid doing is then look at something a bit like the background in my screen and say, oh, I really like that, that's what I want. Because the way that you get that is by finding out what people need. And in this nursery that's behind me, they needed lots of opportunities for big active physical play. A lot of the children that go to this setting don't have any gardens of their own, so they needed that big space. So you find that out by watching how those children play, listening to the way they talk to each other, the way they interact. And it's exactly the same principle from right back then when I first started working with Mick and Ruth, about asking the right questions that are open-ended but give people the opportunity to sort of feel confident about the answers they're giving you. And in a way, Rob, it goes back to that idea of the architects kind of imposing it down because they'll see a site and they'll think of a concept that could fit on that site, and they will make that work in their mind with what that neighbourhood needs. And
you know, I get it. And I mean, again, we need to move on from you as a 25-year-old, but we did a
no. Let's just stay there, shall we?
Right. I liked it.
we did a big project years ago called Skills Planner, which was all about the construction industry and looking at the skills problem right across construction and how this sort of bottom-up open system mindset would help the supply and demand in terms of engagement with people, and you know, came across countless issues of community engagement, and it's still there. Anything in the built environment has a real need to engage in the community, but the dissonance, you know, exists in between you know, what was there before the project and what will be there after the project. And some of these issues that in terms of, you know, needs rather than wants are being driven away by the built environment. You know, so there's a lot of tension there between, you know, what people may need. An affordable house is a really
that would be good
example. You know, and we might get stuck, whether it's Battersea or any other residential or infrastructure project. You know, it's kind of between the needs of individuals and the sort of, you know, the industrial complex of the, you know, the built environment. But so I'm going to move us on because we'll be here forever on that one. Because
I know it's tricky.
If you've got any quick answers to that, then but no. So in seriousness, so that was your neuroplasticity age 25.
Yes.
Then what happened?
And then I moved on from the architecture workshop. I started to run a school grounds project for Durham County Council, working with Groundwork Trust.
Were you employed by the council, Drew?
Yeah, I was employed by Groundwork Trust. Right. But my line manager was the Inspector for Environmental Education at the county. So it was interesting. Again, it was a time, I guess, in the sort of mid-90s when a lot of organisations and institutions were starting to think about how do we work differently. We don't have the in-house skill set to do what we can see needs to be done. So who do we bring on board? And Groundwork Trust, I think at that point had probably about 10 or 12 years of working with communities. So I was employed by them, but effectively working as part of the School Improvement Service in Durham, with a particular focus on environmental education. So delivering, learning programs about that, developing school grounds. And one of the things that was really interesting about that, I loved the project. I loved working for them. I loved working in Durham. But the inspector there, Mike Tones, wanted to start introducing much more about sustainability. And I think before then, I don't think I really knew about that word. I certainly didn't, I hadn't computed it enough to put it into my work. I had been thinking, this is what this school needs, and off we go. And
I think, and another interruption, I can't resist it. You're so interruptible, which is just brilliant. So we should reflect more on how we didn't know anything a few years ago, and how actually, when we look back, I mean, obviously you're not much older than 25 now, but when we look back, over the years, you talk about your diet, you talk about the environment, you talk about, as the, what do we call them, boomers, baby boomers, and they sort of, if you don't have to go back many years where we didn't have any consciousness about sustainability. What was that? It's like in that post-war kind of reconstruction and that. It's just it's amazing to think about.
I think, but that was the imperative, wasn't it? I mean, you coming out with baby boomers, it was about repairing the damage. It was about building these lives up and giving people something to think about. And I think, unfortunately, that was very resource intensive and not particularly good for the planet, but equally it was necessary. And I guess in the 80s and the 90s, we started to think, okay, we can relax a little bit about that bit. We're in a peacetime to all intents and purposes, and we can think about other things. But starting to introduce a concept like sustainability into a local authority and into schools was, at the time, that was quite revolutionary. It was certainly for me, it was the first time I'd actually worked on a project and thought about, okay, I can't just slap in a load of, whatever I want to put in these, heavy standard trees, because actually, is that the right way to do this? It's expensive, but also is the right thing to do. So the project expanded to include a fantastic colleague, again, friends still all these years later, who had a specific focus on sustainability in the schools. And we collaborated a lot. I was looking at design, I was looking at environmental education, he was looking at sustainability education. But I'm pretty sure that we were the only project like that in the country that was paid for effectively by a local authority, employed by a Groundwork Trust, running within an education inspection service in a local authority, and operating across a whole county. And I think we learned as we went along. We didn't know what that was going to look like. And I was there for 5 years, and that project still exists in a particular form in County Durham now, and it encompasses all sorts. It works beyond the county. Big project, and Richhurst is still part of that. But at the time, it was very much suck it and see. How do we sell this concept to schools? The school grounds bit was fine. I could go in and say, I can come and help you make an amazing school grounds. You'll be able to learn out there. Children can have really rich and exciting play. It'll be low maintenance, it'll engage parents. All of that was an easy sell. But the things like eco schools and, revamping how you do your resourcing and purchasing in a school, that was quite a hard sell then. So finding out how you actually create something which is palatable for schools, I think was a really big part of what we were trying to do there. And again, you look back on it now, and schools don't think twice about that. It is part and parcel of what they do. But it was hard work at the time. And again, even when was that sort of late 90s, I guess. I was 10 years out of doing GCSEs and already doing something really different to what I had imagined I'd be doing when I was taking those GCSEs, with a view to I want to be an architect. I'd already well and truly stepped out of that arena into a kind of, I don't know, hybrid organization, I guess you'd call it, and a totally different job than I imagined I'd be doing, with just new concepts and ideas just being flung at you constantly. Exciting time, really, really exciting time. But this classic example of, your career doing this and picking up pieces as you go along and using them for something else, and meeting interesting people along the way that then reshape how you might go forward. So yeah, it was definitely innovative. You kind of don't want to say groundbreaking because it's a bit of an overused term, but in lots of ways it was. I don't think it had been done before, and we would have known about it at the time if it had been.
An earthy metaphor. So then what happened? Groundbreaking. It's all right. My sense of humour often goes unnoticed. So
no, I'd absolutely loved living up north. It was fabulous. I was becoming really interested in that kind of next step up from working directly in the schools and thinking about how do we, coming back a bit to what you were saying a moment ago, Rob, what I was going to say is what needs to change for some of these kind of conceptual projects, town planning projects to change, is for it, clients needed to change. Clients needed to appreciate that top down is not a successful method, and that there are clever ways of engaging communities. And I was becoming really interested in that, the strategy behind that, of how do you make that, what conversations do you have to have, and who do you have to have them with to begin to effect that change so that it will eventually trickle down and have an impact on the ground. So I moved down to Winchester, which is more or less where I am now, to work for Learning Through Landscapes, which is the UK's national school grounds charity. And I was heading up their professional development team, effectively. And it was professional development for schools and for landscape architects to really look at what those core messages are. What does good practice look like? How do we communicate with schools? How do we lobby to government? How do we change policies? And it was perfect for me. It was exactly what I wanted to be doing as the next step up from being the one wielding the pencil, as it was back in those days. That's changed as well. My goodness. But anyway,
that's how you explain to our younger audience what you mean when you say.
I still have pencils. I still have pencils.
I've still got my rotring pens somewhere. I don't know where they are, but anyway. That's therein lies a tale. But so joining the charity down there, the national charity down there, was again, really an opportunity to work with the government. Had various names: Department for Education and Skills, DCSF. That education department had many iterations over the years that I was at LTL. But ultimately, what we were trying to do was break through that wall into curriculum development, ideas about what a school looks like, and particularly what the surroundings of a school looks like. And I suppose the most kind of innovative thing I was involved in there was the learning outside the classroom concept, which is now again a charity in its own right. But that was working with a really enlightened government and education department that really wanted to rethink education, have a real strong focus on education. It was that Labour government under Tony Blair, and they had a really strong emphasis on education, and they were interested in how you flow upwards. What do you learn from your communities to make your schools work for those communities without crushing ambition and aspiration, because that was happening in communities where they were very deprived, where there were second, third generation joblessness. It was becoming very difficult for schools to push that aspiration. And one of the ways of doing that was actually getting people involved in changing their neighborhoods and starting with changing their school grounds, and feeling that you individual child, you individual family can effect change. You can have an impact on your environment. So again, going back to that, talk to us, let us listen, let us try and interpret what you're saying within change in your school, and does this look right for you? So it was that kind of strategic innovation that I was really interested in, and we had many years of that until 2010, when it kind of, yeah, all
Well, and
those
then.
budgets which had been doing budgets which had been, you know, revamping the secondary estate in England, a massive investment in new secondary schools that were desperately needed. And part of my team were working on that, and I was working on the equivalent, but in early years settings, kind of birth to 5. All of that money, literally within days of the election, was gone. And yeah, therein lies a tale. So not long after that, I became self-employed. So yeah, it's again, I took an awful lot with me, obviously, from all the things that I'd done before, but I didn't feel that without those big kind of infrastructure projects, the charity was not going to be able to carry on operating the way that it had. And it's still here, which is the most important thing. It's still going. It's still really busy. But yeah, since then I've been
Rebirth,
myself. Sorry, Annabelle.
I think it may have its time again. I think that there's definitely a focus on education in the round as to what's actually important and what skills you want to take forward and what matters, in life. And I think a lot of what you've just described, it falls very much into the having, responsibility and accountability, but
Yes.
because you're being heard,
Agency.
in your local community. I think that, I hear a lot more, I think there's definitely a call to action that actually that this is the society we have not created and we would much prefer. So maybe it will have its time again.
Well, I mean, it
Hopefully.
will. I mean, the charity itself, Learning Through Landscapes, is mega busy, mega busy, and they now work with a lot of corporates that will fund these programs. So that idea I was talking about of changing the way that clients think about design and about neighbourhoods, that change is happening. It's going to continue to evolve, but in many ways that fight has been won, because there are big funders who are looking at their CSR programs and thinking that actually I can see that our money would be really well spent here. It will have an impact. It will lift aspiration in schools. I mean, going right back to sort of 1990, when there was a very innovative research report published called Special Places, Special People. And I don't know if I've still got it I usually have it on my bookshelf here. But one of the key quotes in it resonated so much with me in those days. I still remember it now. And it was basically a child saying, there's nothing but tarmac and grass here. And maybe they just think that's good enough for us. And that was what a child thought. That's what they see every single day in their school. And that's what they think is good enough for them. And as you can see from my background, I don't agree with that at all. That our children deserve so much more, our communities deserve so much more. But that is, if that's all you give people, that's all that they know about.
Yeah.
But I think we have changed. We have changed since those days. I think we appreciate that, coming back to that idea of well-being, that if that's what you give children and young people, if that's what they see every single day and their schools falling to pieces, what messages does that give them about how valued they are by society?
Yeah, we heard some inspiring stories of people almost doing what this is. We now have a consciousness and we need to do this, but despite the education system. So there's a lot of this happening on weekends and outside of core school hours, because the education system is perhaps not, whether it's not the money, the energy, the appetite, the political will, or whatever. But as you say, it's the philanthropists and the charitable trusts, funders, corporate, whether it's ESG. Now we talk about environmental social governance, which is the new thing after CSR. But it's almost, we need to do it without the government, because we don't really have the political will for educational reform.
Not at the moment.
So,
not at the moment.
But we realise we need to do it, but we're it's like, well, the government's broke, schools are falling apart, we don't have enough teachers, the
Mm.
classroom dynamics are awful, and if you go
Mm.
to inner city space, you can't see any green anywhere. So it's kind of like, we had a conversation with the National Trust about this, which was quite interesting. It's like a pretty big beast about how do we actually build these more nature-based spaces for people to be in, where you perhaps don't see green if you're in a
Yeah.
city.
Yeah, and National Trust were one of a lot of a big chunk of organisations that were involved in learning outside the classroom. That concept, when it first sort of kicked off, probably maybe 2010, something like that. I was learning through landscapes at the time, and there was a huge kind of will with organisations like National Trust, and obviously with the various government departments, and with Tree Council, and all of these RSPB were really involved in it. All of these big organisations, very, very large charities, some of them, all of whom had an interest in education, and all of which were keen to get into schools with their message. And the learning outside the classroom initiative, that concept, did bring them all together, because it was about that children don't learn best when they're sitting at a desk with a pencil. That is not the optimum way that human beings have been evolved to learn. It might be convenient, and it might be cost effective, and it might be all these other things, but it's actually counterintuitive to the way that human beings like to operate. We like our Lego. We like to build it ourselves. We like to build that knowledge and that understanding ourselves and experience it for ourselves. So all of these organizations came together to say, yes, these are the learning objectives that we still have to have. You're going to have to still do your GCSEs, kids, but one of the ways that we can enrich the way that you learn that material is going beyond that classroom, even if it's just to do something in the hall, or do something in the playground, or go on an educational visit, or go abroad, or pushing your horizons further beyond your desk, your whiteboard in front of you.
And again, there's some beautiful stories of the learning outside the classroom. So this is sort of the experiential learning, but just up in the northwest is a senior police guy who happens to be a boxer. So we've done a lot around sport in the military and police force, and there is this sort of how do we reduce demand for services by addressing the cause rather than the symptoms.
Okay.
So long story short, boxing is the story. So setting up boxing clubs for kids, first of all, as a diversionary activity, to stop them boxing each other on the streets. Well, just have it as a sport. But actually, the system's desire for learning formally, the GCSEs and the NVQs and that educate. So there was a sort of carrot and stick, in that you could do your boxing and your sport, and you could get out there in the wild, but then you had to sit down and do a tiny bit of learning, and it was outside the classroom, but it was in the boxing club. But actually, it was the pathway, and they were just really receptive learners, because they didn't have the anger or that was they expressed their physicality, and then they did the learning. But it was all together, and it was outside the classroom. There are so many stories, all of that nature, where you can get some incredible nature, again, pun.
But also, there's an element there, Rob, of this, what you've just touched on it, about physicality. And one of my other long-term colleagues, Jan White, often talks about embodied learning. So she's an early years specialist, and she talks about the fact that every piece of learning that we engage with needs to be physical. There needs to be a physical movement. And she talks about, the very first thing that, when you're expecting, Annabelle and I will remember this, the first time you really know there is a baby is when it moves and you feel it. That's the first.
Didn't believe it until that point.
No, exactly. Sometimes you still don't. But the baby communicates, that fetus communicates with you through movement. That's the only way it can tell you that there's something, you eat your hot curry or whatever it might be, and it's going on. That's the baby communicating with you. It comes out when it's born. it, you know, yes, it might shout and scream as well, but it moves. It's getting itself out into that world through movement. So the very first form of communication for humans is about movement, and we keep on moving through our lives with very young children. Movement and cognition are very, very closely connected, that one can't happen without the other. And then we do this, we now have a really kind of, you know, a good understanding of early years development. We have a curriculum which is successful in many ways in early years, and then we get them into key stage 1 and key stage 2, and it's like, sit down, sit still, here's your pencil, there's the whiteboard, and we stop, we prevent. And one of the things that really stuck with me when I first met Jan many, many years ago was she was talking about a child. If a child is wiggling about and can't sit still, they need more movement, not less. The very last thing you need to be saying to that child is sit still, because everything inside the fundamental biology, physiology is telling them, I need to move. And that for me, that's the next kind of frontier, I suppose. You know, we've sold that idea of children need to be high quality play is good for them. We've talked about good quality landscapes, but I think there's still quite a long way to go with education and with families understanding that children need to be moving all the time. You know, rest and relax is important, but you know, we all three of us have been sitting here and we're talking and our arms are going like this and moving around in our chairs, and because that's what your body is made to do.
Yeah, and I still can't sit. Annabelle will testify to this through a 1 or 2 hour lecture or presentation. I couldn't ever sit in a classroom. I am still age 57, that wriggler. You know, it's just I need to.
Well, because you hear, and I mean,
hardwired that way.
Yeah, and I mean, with neurodiversity and a lot of the, I mean, my son has dyslexia, but within the school that he's in, there's this, you know, it's nearly half the school, I think, has learning support, because it's, you know, I feel that's enlightened because it's just, you know, but you know, he talks about, because he gets extra time when they have exams, so he's in a mix with every kind of neurodiversity that there is. But you know, some people with ADHD, they have permission to stand up and walk around the room because they can't, you know, they need to do this as part of getting their exam done.
Exactly. And yet life doesn't come to a stop, does it? Because one child knows fundamentally that I need to move. And you know, coming right back to the very beginning of that conversation of institutions need to be fitting around the people and making that person be, you know, the best. I don't want to say laugh, love, life and all that sort of thing, but be the best person that they can. And you cannot be the best person that you can if you are fitting into somebody else's shoebox. And I guess of all of the things that have happened through my kind of long and diverse career, I guess the thread that has drawn me all the way through has been that idea of learning, and how do we learn, and how do we help people learn more, and how do we keep on learning right up until, you know, our final days, because that is how you keep your brain, you know, plastic and active, and we do need to keep moving. And it's interesting, just all of those kind of maybe a couple of threads that have gone through absolutely everything. When I analyze, why did I do that? What was really interesting about that? Why did I learn from that? It's almost always comes down to this idea of absorbing learning and the effective ways that we can do that. So
I guess we should do a little bit of life after Dave Cameron in 2010 to wind it, because I would really not like
we're back in the life of Dave Cameron. So.
leave it there. So yes. So let's talk us forward a little bit, because I want to do a bit of looking forward as well, without breaking every world record for the longest podcast ever recorded ever.
I'm conscious of your time.
Sorry, you're going to have to cut.
No, we're just having so much fun. It's like.
So after that, well, I started my own business. I decided to make it a community interest company. Again, that's another thread that's always gone through my working life, is working for not-for-profits. The company, as you know, CIC, it is a real company. It's a profit-making company. a very small one, but the profit is reinvested in what we do. So the project behind me is one of the projects that I did through Play Learning Live. So I was still doing design projects, but it was much more. I was doing quite a lot of curriculum development with schools. I was doing a lot of training with teachers and early years practitioners, and just helping them explore some of the concepts that we've just been talking about. Is how do you give children agency over their own environment? How do you make that feasible? And particularly with early years, how do you see that through the lens of the curriculum? Because pretty much every single thing you can do in an early years setting will sit somewhere within whatever the current iteration of the early years foundation stage is. So it's just helping teachers and practitioners interpret what they're doing so that they feel like they can tick boxes, but actually what we're really doing is focusing on the child at the center of all of that. So that's what PLL does. And I guess that the most interesting and fun thing that I do with PLL is 50 Dangerous Things Camp. And I know that we are the only one that does anything quite like this. So in 2011, I was fortunate enough to go to a conference in San Francisco and spoke to Gay Vitale, an author and an educator and an innovator and a kind of engineer and a technician. And he had written a book called 50 Dangerous Things You Should Let Your Children Do. And there's a real range from, licking the end of a 9-volt battery to give yourself an electric shock, through to jumping from high heights and sticking your head out of the window of a fast-moving car. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful things in there. But the concept behind it is that our children's lives are far too boring, quite frankly. We are risk-averse as a society, and actually we need to relearn how to do some of the things that, again, our bodies fundamentally want us to be doing. So the book was just amazing, and I was so taken by it. And eventually I thought this would make a really great summer camp concept. So I kind of sought permission from Gay Vitale, and he was like, yeah, no, go for it. Absolutely. And 10 years ago, 2013, we ran the first camp. We've done it Easter and summer every year since, even through lockdown. And it is just very different. There's bits of bushcraft in it. There's sporty bits in it. But there's also just, if a child comes to us and arrives at 9 o'clock and is in a bit of a meh place, and what they actually want to do is sit and poke our fire all day until going home time, they can. There are things that they can do if they want to engage with them, and if they don't, then they can just sit there and do what they want to do, and we will facilitate it. And we do crazy, dangerous things and, absolutely mad things. But actually, again, as that has evolved over 10 years, we are now much more aware of the child at the center of our provision. And we have got the resources, and we've got the skills, and we've got the knowledge to be able to say, if a child suddenly decides, I want to build a go-kart and use all of the power tools, then knock yourself out. We know, quite literally sometimes, yes, here's the tools, we'll supervise you, off we go, let's build a go-kart. And we can do that. But equally, if a child wants to climb up a tree, and we do get a lot of children who spend a lot of time up trees, if you want to go up their tree and build yourself a platform and just sit there and watch the world go by, then that's fine too. Because where else, we with these rose-tinted glasses, we imagine that that's what we did as children, and we three are of an age, and maybe we did do that. I did a bit of that. But the parents of the children who are coming to summer camp are the next generation down from us, and they didn't do that because they were already in that generation of parents being risk averse, and you can't go out on your bike alone, you can't walk to the local shop alone, we're really worried about helicopter parenting. So I kind of look at it as a bit like a hierarchy of our parents who, when my dad was going off to Scotland climbing at age 15 on the back of a mate's motorbike, the next generation down was allowed to go and build a den in a tree and come back when it's dark. The next generation was suddenly, their boundaries were much, much tighter than they had been for previous generations. And now we've got this generation of children who are really not allowed to do anything. So the camp, and Gavor's book, and the camp, and the idea of what we're trying to do is to push back against that and just say, actually, children are very competent. They are amazing risk assessors. really amazing risk assessors. They can do that for themselves. You think about the analogy I often use is a child taking their first steps. So they've done the pulling up, they've done the crawling, they've done the pulling up on the sofa. But you imagine what a risk that is the very first time you, as a toddler, decide to independently just go for it. That is risk assessment. You know, that is a child thinking, is the time right to do this? Do I feel strong enough? And we accept that as a part of childhood, and yet suddenly again they reach the point at which we can have a cogent conversation with them, exactly the time when they can explain those risks and they can talk about them. We stop letting them take risks, and we decide for them about whether it's okay to climb up some rocks or, you know, play near water or whatever it might be. So I suppose in the last kind of 10 or 15 years, that idea of agency and risk taking has become a real driver for the work that I do.
Yeah, well, my fun fact is that I still lick the end of a 9-volt battery.
So do we.
Yeah. Every morning.
This is an honest confession, because it's a lot more fun than actually using my voltage tester. Yeah.
I honestly say I've never done that. I've never done that, but not because anybody told me not to, just because I've just never done that.
To you. Yeah. Well, it is a good way.
It's the same reason that toothpaste has an artificial ingredient in it that you know fizzes the mouth. There's actually no reason toothpaste needs to taste of anything at all other than to give you a little sensation in your mouth. So you know, back to the risk thing. Risk is maybe a dangerous word because we know that the childhood brain is not developed in such a way that it can assess things in a way that an adult brain can. What the children have is they don't have this sort of sense of ego that there might be shame if they fall in a puddle, or because everything is an adventure. So when they're kind of looking at something, it just becomes, please give me more, I'll just experience this. And so I guess within, I don't want people to watch this and go, I'm not sending my kids anywhere near Jules because I've read this, you know. But actually what it's the ability to be an adventurer and to actually just experience things, like even if you're 57, putting the battery in your mouth because you kind of know you can justify it's not going to hurt me, you know. And again, you know, seeing me with power tools, you know, or on top of my roof or whatever, people go, you're great, but actually, you know, it's like within the boundaries of, you know, I kind of know. So I love being up there because I'm really quite frightened a lot of the time, but it's a very high, you know, it's like, and I'm very old and this looks very stupid, but actually
the reality of risk, I think, is the perception of risk is the thing that stops parents from you know, allowing and enabling their children to have those adventurous experiences, because you know, you're catastrophizing. You're basically thinking, if I let my child go and do this, they could die. Well, do you know what? They could die.
Let me elaborate on that in a story that if it's an adult perception of the catastrophe, no matter how low the risk is of it manifesting. So, for example, if I talk to the average mum or dad about, you know, being buried underneath the earth in a coffin and, you know, losing oxygen and dying in that way, then that would really bring up a absolute fear of, you know, and the event happening in disproportion to its probability. You know, that so because I can catastrophize. So the fact that it's probably a billion, trillion, million to one of, it doesn't matter. It's the fact that if you build, so, but that's the adult brain. That's not the kid's brain. The kid's brain is me and my 9-volt battery. So I think that risk is a bit of a dangerous generalization in some way. Well, somebody could die, but it's like a trillion to, you know, the probability is very small.
But things like
our ability to So our ability to assess risk, like numerically, is rubbish. We're
It is
rubbish
rubbish.
at
Yeah,
assessing
it
risk.
is
Yeah.
rubbish. And actually, also, what we don't do, and certainly within education and play, in the last kind of 10 years, we have been looking slightly more. Maybe we've been looking at risk benefit assessment. So what you're doing is you are starting with, why are we doing this? What's good about this? And when you've basically convinced yourself this is a great thing to do, then you look at what the hazards might be, and what the outcome of those hazards might be, and what the mitigation factors you'll put in place to prevent that from happening. So we use power tools with our children at camp, but we have risk benefit assessment. So we know why we're doing it. We know what benefits we'll get. We know why it's a good thing to do and a helpful thing to do. We also know what the risks are, and we teach children to risk benefit assess. And I think that's one of the concepts which certainly the play sector have been really trying to get across to families and institutions over the last kind of 10 or 15 years, is that actually risk is good, dirt is good, danger is good. These are all things that if a child doesn't actually learn to climb a tree, then they're missing out on a lot of the cognitive benefits and physical benefits, those benefits. But also, it's far more likely that they'll suddenly come across a tree when they're on their own, and they're not around an adult that might be able to spot for them, and they'll just go, and they won't have the skills and the knowledge to keep themselves safe. So we give children these opportunities for risk taking, knowing that it will build up their physical and mental resilience. And then when they're faced with genuine risks where they've got to look at that and think, do I do it? Do I not do it? Yes or no? They make the right choices. Or 99 times out of 100 they make the right choices, because they've experienced that dilemma before about what's the right thing to do, and physically and emotionally and mentally I can handle this. I mean, again, risk is one of these conversations that you can sit there and particularly in early childhood have for hours, because there is so much to unpack there. But I think it's a really crucial part of what we offer children now, or need to be offering children now, is the opportunity to get things wrong and not be embarrassed or ashamed, and come back to this idea of engineering and architecture and all of these things as being play. Because effectively what you're doing is you're playing with ideas, you're playing with concepts, you're working out how they go together. If it doesn't work, if my Lego doesn't work, I take it to bits and I redo it until I'm happy with what I've got, and that is play. And that is what we do in our work, isn't it? Every time we try something, every time we write something and then rewrite it effectively, we're playing, we're testing it. So maybe rethinking our families and our children as engineers, STEM technicians, is a better way of giving them that opportunity to be risk takers. I think they are.
So I kind of came back to the risk question, because I felt it's so important to have just developed it and kicked it around, because otherwise you look at it superficially and I haven't actually no. I didn't want people to do sort of a no. I mean, I think I'm really conscious of the time, but I think that I would like to develop, just if we can, just one more tiny little point, which is it's a moment to just ask the question slowly. So you've got risk, and we've done that to death, and then this experiential learning.
It's an interesting turn of phrase you've got there.
Yeah, I mean, my world is full of inappropriate puns and metaphors and analogies.
Okay.
Okay, right. We're dead bored of risk now. But the next one is the experiential learning, and it again, superficially, as people who are not age 10, we can look and go, well, when I was a lad, when I did this, I was up trees and scaffolding and power tools, and I still am. I've just never grown up. But our children aren't, and so we how do we bring that? And it's quite a dilemma, because they are as adventurous and playful as we were when we were 10. It's just they're doing our Minecraft, and they're doing it perhaps in some ways that are depriving them of some physicality. But it's not an obvious path for young people to take when sort of contrasted with you know, an online environment or other things that they have been in a soup of conditioning, and those that, you know, they're stimulating loads of dopamine and lots of sort of, you know, interesting behaviors on the games and all of that sort of stuff. But yet the essential skills that one might need when faced with a tree or a, you know, a DIY job. My eldest son is in his first home, and it's like every part of the house kind of, you know, he's got to approach this like, oh, I've never seen anything like that before. It's like, how can you be mid-20s and not wired a plug, drilled a hole in a wall, plastered a ceiling, painted this,
because you just don't do that anymore.
It's like, well, I've done, and as the dad, you could imagine, it would be no greater joy in my life for them to have spent a life in a workshop, but I couldn't. I tried, you know, it didn't work. I suppose I'm a rubbish dad, but other than that, you know, it didn't happen. It's happening now. I wonder, in this incredible thing that you're doing, how we just do more of it. How could we? How do not fight against, but recognizing we live in a system that is absolutely not conducive to experiential learning and nature-based environmental exploration. How have you? What advice can you give me as my former self as a dad?
First of all, I would be quite positive about the situation. Actually, I think there are huge numbers of nature-based initiatives. That there are, you know, government-backed ones. As one, National Trusts are involved in one of themselves. Learning Through Landscapes are involved in it. You know, these big programs of rewilding children, if you like, rewilding childhood, giving them those opportunities. They are there. Almost every, you know, town and village has got somebody who's providing forest school learning. You know, you don't have to travel very far to do that anymore. You know, there are lots and lots of opportunities. I think the barriers are still coming almost back to that thing of changing the client's mind, the client being the parent here, that actually getting the client to understand the value of what you're offering. And funding is always an issue. I think there's a huge willingness, there's a definite willingness to embrace more experiential, playful, adventurous experiences in childhood and in learning and in schools, but at the moment that the big barrier is always going to be funding. You know, the summer camp we run is not the cheapest in this area by any means, and that's partly because I do backfill it so that we can offer free places to families that would otherwise wouldn't access it, but it's also because, you know, my team are all teachers. So they're expensive people to pay for. My insurance, I can't even tell you how expensive the insurance is for a summer camp called 50 Dangerous Things You Should Let Your Children Do. You know,
well, I mean, so is there the demand? Is the problem so as a funder, you know, and in terms of what I love rewilding children. I mean, that's just,
I like that.
I've never heard the expression. We talk rewilding every day, but I just love the idea of rewilding children. It's just that says everything in one word about what we should be doing more of. So, with the right funding, is there the demand from the clients, the parents, in your mind, or does the money need to be spent on creating more demand? Would it just happen naturally because we've got the capacity there? What's broken is the funding, because that's easier to fix.
It's a bit of both. I think if for example, I mean, Forest School is a good example. It's sold itself as a concept really well. So I come from a background of outdoor learning, and I'm slightly sniffy about Forest School because it's a piece of outdoor learning, but it has really good PR. So being positive about it, it's great PR. I think there are very few.
What's Forest School for those people, including me?
Okay, sorry, apologies. That's really lazy of me. So Forest School is a concept that came from Scandinavia. It's outdoor based. It doesn't have to be in a forest, but obviously mostly it is. There's lots of bushcraft. It's very child-centred in its purest form. It is a child-centred provision. So there's there's really good ratios, maybe 1 to 6 of adult to child. It's for babies upwards to any age, really. But the common theme is that it is based outdoors. It doesn't have an indoor, fallback. It's all outdoor provision, whatever the weather, all year round. And children with lots and lots of schools will have a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours of forest school sessions a week. And that's generally how it is. You'll go every week for maybe 6 or 8 weeks and build up your skills and your confidence in playing and learning outdoors. So it's a really lovely, neat package that can be sold to schools and is sold to schools. And I think there are very few parents who, if they were offered that and didn't have to pay for it, and schools who were offered it and didn't have to pay for it, they would absolutely snap it up, because they can all see the value of having time in nature and having time outdoors, and, if you like, off curriculum. But of course, you are actually building your vocabulary, you're communicating with you, using problem solving skills constantly, all of those really important skills that build resilience, mental resilience back in the classroom. So I think there's almost no schools that would say no to forest school, but forest school is run by forest school practitioners, and they need to be paid, and they need an environment to work in, and they need their insurance, and they need their resources and equipment, and all of that comes with a cost, and there is no core funding for that sort of provision. So I think the demand is definitely there. There is no funding. It is a sell. Making that leap from something like forest school to what I do at 50 Dangerous Things Camp is quite a leap. And although we are always sold out, and I'm not just saying that as a look at how fab we are, we always sell out, because we have a limited number of spaces that we can offer, and we have lots of children that want to engage in what we do. So we know there's demand, but again, it's who else wants to do it? It actually, to make that extra step is quite a big one, and it was a risk for us to decide to do it. And I suppose that was in the nature of what we were providing. If we weren't brave enough to do it, how on earth would we expect parents to hand their children over to us every day? So that there is definitely demand. The demand is building. I don't think that there's a demand yet for fully outdoor schools on a wide scale, but there's definitely a demand on a smaller scale. There are lots of outdoor nurseries that are outdoors all day, every day, all year round, and I've visited some amazing ones. And the quality of provision, they're outstanding, Ofsted rated. The quality of provision is unbelievable. Beautiful forest environments, field environment, farm environments. That there is definitely demand there, but I think politically the will is not quite there yet to make that a core provision for schools. Even to just say every child before they're 7, every child should have had an experience of forest school. That would be a really simple, straightforward thing to do, to give them that 6-week, 8-week period, a bit like swimming lessons. We say that children need to learn how to swim, and you do that swimming lessons at junior school. Most children, maybe that's what it should be for outdoor learning in forest school.
Lovely. To be continued from my point of view, if we
Yeah,
can.
I'm just very conscious of your time, and also conscious that we haven't even got to today what you're doing now, which is really crazy, interested on hearing about.
I know.
I don't know whether we should do that quickly, or
whether we could get you back for another.
Come back. Let's do it again.
I can very quickly. The reason that I'm doing what I'm doing is because one of the tangible skills that I've developed over the years is project management. So have had a lot of projects of lots of different kinds, and project management to me is one of those problem solvings. That's how I approach it. I enjoy it. And I'm currently managing an art trail project for a charity, an NHS charity in Southampton. We have 7-foot lighthouses populating Southampton next year, 40 of them designed by artists, 40 of them designed by schools, and they will be all over the city, and I'm project managing that. And I've ended up doing that because the classic situation, a local organisation, local charity needed somebody who could project manage. And I was self-employed. I had a bit of capacity. I had a couple of days a week to do it. And I was like, oh, I'll do that. And so that was last year. And then the charity that I'm currently working for also wanted somebody like that. And I saw that and thought, oh, I can do that. And not only can I do that, but I did that last year. So take me. And they did. So that's why I'm doing this. So at the moment, there's not any design happening. I'm fully focused on Light the South, and will be for the next kind of year, and then I'll be diving back into normal life, I guess. But there you go. It's just weird how things happen, isn't it?
Oh wow,
Seem to have lost
yeah,
that bit.
no, Annabelle seemed to have lost her connect, which is really a shame. We're going to wrap it up, I think, and we'll get you back on to be continued. I mean, I'd love to
Yeah,
continue the
sure.
conversation outside the call. I think the connection is a bit dodgy all
Yeah, it
round
is,
for
isn't
some
it?
reason.
Yeah, yeah.
But I have had an amazing time. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have,
I'm
yeah.
really grateful for your contribution because it was so insightful. And please accept my apologies for the number of interruptions. It was only
No, it's good. It's been
fact that I
really
was
good to have
really
that. Yeah, it's been good to have that debate, and kind of, a lot of assumptions that I make, to have those challenged, I think is really important. And it's been fascinating
it was
discussion.
just brilliant. So until the next time, thank you so much,
Thank you
and
very much.
we will speak to you soon. Cheers.
Brilliant.
Bye.